Hello, hello. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Still just waiting. I think a few people are still dripping through, but great to see so many people joining this evening. We've got a super exciting panel, and I think we can get right into it. So to introduce myself, I'm Sam Davies. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Flux, which is an enhanced rock weathering company based here in Kenya. I'm going to be moderating this session, and I'm really excited to be joined by some of the real heavy hitters of the sector to go through the topic that we're discussing tonight. So from Biosora, we have Ines Serra, who is the CEO and co-founder. Biosora is one of the leading carbon removal suppliers on the continent, and they are a biochar project developer, also based here in Kenya. Also joining us, we have Opiemi Adlesi. He is a life cycle assessment expert working for the Kuna Climate Center, part of the Kuna Foundation from Kuna Nagel. He's based in Hamburg and has a long list of career achievements in climate and carbon research. And we're super excited to have his views from the KC side this evening. And last but no means least, we have one of the leading experts on Article 6 and carbon removal frameworks and legislations in Africa, Judy Ndichu. She used to work for South Pole. Now she is a heavily sought after consultant working with governments all over the continent to try and sort out the frameworks and ultimately enable the massive potential that all these carbon markets have. So just before we dive in, why are we doing this session tonight? Okay, part of COP30, I'm part of the CDR Pavilion. But beyond Flux, I also represent an organization called CRK, Carbon Removal Kenya. This is an industry association founded last year to essentially help promote and advocate for carbon removal solutions in Kenya, but also in Africa, because Kenya has been leading the way on the continent so far in terms of engineered carbon solutions, and actually a lot of nature-based solutions as well from previous sectors. And why is that? Well, Kenya has some of the most ideal conditions you could hope for to set up a carbon removal company. We've got abundant renewable energy. We've got great climatic conditions for things like rock weathering. We've got large availability of biomass. We also have a really strong tech sector here in Nairobi. And we've also got some of the most forward-thinking carbon legislation. So that's the reason that 80% of the continent's CDR startups are actually based here in Kenya. And so we're excited about the potential of that, but we also see, and the clues in the name of this webinar, that Kenya has a bit of a responsibility to show the way about how we can scale this across the continent and set the foundations and the frameworks for really good scalable CDR across the continent. Okay, so let's dive into it. I'm going to start with you, Opiemi. You're working with Kuna Climate Center. They've got a big interest in CDR. What is it about Kenya and African CDR that caught the interest of the KCC? And like, why do you guys see potential here, and why is it such a focus for the organization?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sam, for the nice introduction, and thank you also for having me. For Kunen Climate Center, we see carbon removal in Kenya and also in Africa as a whole from a strategic and a kind of practical perspective. So basically, our work combines science, logistics, and climate solutions. And we see Africa as one of the most important geographies, like you've said, for scaling durable, high quality carbon removal. So Kenya on its own, we see that it stands out with regards to, several supporting policies that we've seen around, also scientific capabilities with several universities, research institute going into some of these discussions we are already having. And also they have the potentials across pathways like enhanced weathering already, biochar, and even biomass to carbon storage. So basically, our focus is on credibility to ensure that carbon removal is kind of measurable, durable, as well as socially and economically beneficial. So, and most importantly, we also think that it should be scalable as well. So this means that we need like strong MRV systems as well as transparent supply chains. So talking about supply chains, for we from the KCC, we are looking to leverage, our expertise in logistics because we are quite a giant in the side of logistics, and as well as capacity building to support scalable and impactful deployment.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you see the opportunities that are naturally here, and then also there's a nice link with Kuehne Nagel as being a global logistics company and seeing how we can create some of those efficiencies. Judy, you've been working in carbon markets for a long time and really diving deep into Article 6. In that respect, CDR, engineered CDR, is a bit of a new kid on the block. Could you talk to us about some of your experience so far in the markets and leading into where we are today, and how you think CDR can learn from some of the legislation and the policy and the frameworks that have taken place so far, and how that fits into some of the way Kenya is shaping this?
Thank you, Sam. Allow me to join in thanking you for the great introduction and the opportunity also to join as a panelist and contribute to this great idea. So the starting point for making Article 6 work in the continent and also in the country starts off from the NDCs that we have seen countries across Africa and in particular also Kenya outline. And removals have been observed to be part and parcel of the areas that have been included in across board all the NDCs. The only difference we see is that the tech or the engineered removal is conspicuously not explicitly mentioned, and this would not be governments or maybe the drafters of these NDCs, given that it's a conversation or a subject area that is evolving. Would see different techs or different removals that as we see now becoming more prominent. We have seen the afforestation, reforestation included in various NDCs, and that's a starting point of counting the removals contribution to the climate change agenda. Some of the technologies like biochar have at least been included in various NDCs and even in various frameworks as possible solutions that governments are willing to consider. We see direct air capture and BECCS and product mineralization and direct and enhanced rock weathering, not as explicitly or conspicuously mentioned as the NBS or the afforestation side of things. So what is the opportunities and the future or the optimism that you see coming from this kind of technology? Allow me to start from the eligibility of key methodologies under the COSIA kind of market, and that sends a huge signal to investors, to governments also, to strategies that can be included moving forward in the continent. With the broader, there's always the call for technology transfer and innovation and technology to the continent, and capacity building to be able to have national entities or investments originating from the continent contributing to climate change. So we see direct air, for example, now getting a lot of research or lots of prominence in Kenya. We see opportunities for more technology transfer from such continents and such countries like the US and Europe. We see product mineralization that has taken a greater root in the UK, Switzerland, the USA, taking a lot of prominence in areas that can shape the future of CDR in the future. What would be then the opportunity that we can include this in the legislations? As I mentioned earlier, we have observed afforestation and waste management sectors being included as part of areas that countries are considering to issue authorizations, and this sends a clear signal for investors and the private sector to look forward to. So I would say the future is bright, and the time is now to invest in these continents. Back to you, Sam.
Great, Judy. Some really interesting points there. I think I'm going to come back to you on a couple of those, specifically regarding, the success of some of the early methodologies. Biochar now making its way in. So yeah, it would be interesting. I'll come back, I think, on about what we need to do for some of the other pathways, like where are some of the other sectors not focusing. But just to turn it over to Ines as a biochar supplier, you've been operating now for over 2 years in Kenya. Maybe it's more than 3 years now. What do you think? How have you seen that shift in attitudes towards biochar and other engineered solutions, and they're starting to be included in some of these discussions in a different way from maybe it was 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and pleasure to be here today. So I think when I came here first, which was 3 years ago, with my university, Strathmore University, what I got shocked about is the amount of natural resources in terms of biomass that was being burned, and then coupled with the opportunity of agriculture that employs 40% of the people in Kenya. So I think those two ingredients for biochar at least made it like a really attractive place to set up biochar as a carbon removal solution, because it both leaves a legacy for soil fertility and it also increases farmer profits. I think this approach, really biochar driven, as we transition now more than 2.5 years in the row, is just like getting a lot of attention into a lot of further ingredients for carbon removal. I think Kenya is just at the intersection of climate needs together with climate opportunity, and this is just like the best for climate justice. And evidence for this is the amount of deep tech startups that have joined CRK specifically in other pathways, getting the great infrastructure of electricity into ground, the great talent, the great deep tech. And I think it's been insane. When we came here first, a lot of people were asking what is biochar. Now this is no longer a question, which is a really great external validation of an industry that is growing extremely fast, and even more when we are seeing the CRK shipping over.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right, and I think biochar in many ways does pave the way for a lot of other CDR pathways. If you look at the markets now on the voluntary side, almost I think it's 95% of the purchases are taken up with biochar. It gives you an indication of the price point that buyers are looking at and the level of verification and validation that biochar has got now from getting going a little bit earlier. Judy, Kenya has done really well to get itself into this position where it is, I would say, leading on the continent in some of these frameworks and policies, and having its now second NDC, that's really positive. I think that, and some of the bilateral agreements coming through. What do you think have been some of the really key, just to get a bit granular, like what do you think have been some of the really key wins so far that we've had that we can learn from going forward in the future? What do we want to replicate again that we've had success from, that has unlocked some part of the market that would be great to replicate from a permanent CDR lens?
Yeah, thank you. Article 6 transactions, we'll see them now being led largely by governments. And congratulations to Kenya for the key successes. As you mentioned, Kenya is leading the continent in a lot of these, I would call them steps that are leading towards a clean and an easy environment to work in. One of them is the institutional arrangements. We see Kenya took key steps ahead in identifying that carbon markets in general could be a contributor to meeting its NDC. And hence the inclusion of carbon markets within the legal frameworks then stands in as a first step. Not many countries have their legal frameworks in place, and that is at least giving a clear signal that Kenya is ready to invest. The second one is on communication and identification of the sectors that Kenya is willing to consider to include as part of Article 6 transactions. We just saw recently Kenya submitted its 6 for communication criteria or eligible projects that could be considered. While that communication is very broad, it gives, I would say, a signal and assurance to the investors, private sector and innovators, inclusion of afforestation, for example, inclusion of waste sector as also an area for consideration, being a key sector. I would also put out that there is a very vibrant and informed body of innovators in the country, and I think this is also presented by many other factors beyond carbon or beyond climate change legislations, such as having a good working environment or a good environment to establish your business and a good environment to undertake your research. The level of expertise available makes it easier for innovators to look forward to the sector. I would say Kenya is always ready to test out. As I mentioned, direct air capture for now is being tested somewhere in the Rift Valley. And maybe it's also the opportunity that Kenya opens ways for innovation and opens ways for testing out, trying and failing. Even before the Article 6 on the voluntary market space, Kenya was 25% of all the projects were in Kenya, and even many of them on the CDM front. So those are, to start with, the initial key steps and maybe key environmental conditions that have made it easier. There is also the availability of renewable energy and stable energy in the country. We always mentioning that we have 90 plus of our energy grid, which is stable and it's also green. So that presents an opportunity for tech engineering, for example, if you're looking at a facility that would be requiring such energy, then that is readily available. I would also want to appreciate, for example, the Carbon Removal Association. It's an industry of like minds coming together, working very closely with government. And the fact that the government has these institutions in place, the people, the offices to engage with, then it opens a way of these hard conversations. Even in areas that are difficult, maybe there are gaps in science, then that presents an opportunity to explore the future, which then high congratulations to the government and to the business-minded entities like yourselves and others who have come in to invest in the country and by extension in the continent. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, some really, really great stuff in there, Judy. I think you're so right in that one of the key movers for afforestation and some previous pathways is that communication and identification by the government that this is something that we are going to include and that we want to include. I think carbon removal on the engineered sense has got a lot to learn from that, and potentially, because a lot of it is startup led, we can be too guilty of just focusing on getting our heads down and doing startup life and getting the research done and getting the deployments done, and not maybe focusing on the bigger picture. And I think that's where nature-based solutions has had a huge amount of success in being included in all these things. I wonder, Opiemi, because you're not from the startup side like myself and Ines, where does KCC see itself fitting into that remit? Like, what are some of the ways that Kuna Climate Centre wants to influence this sector in Kenya, and some of the ways that it thinks it can have a positive effect on growing the sector?
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and also thank you, UD, for, giving a lot of broader light on, some of the policies that we already see. So, like I was saying earlier, that we at KCC, we are basically into logistics, human development. So we believe that from our perspective, we believe that we see a combination of, clearer policies. So once there are clearer policies going on, it can help a lot to move things faster and quicker, because already we see that Kenya itself has like the most advanced climate policies in environmental climate policy in Africa. So, like some of the things that Jody already highlighted earlier, like the growing clarity on Article 6 mechanisms, Kenya climate change act amendments that we all also see. So from our side, once we can also try to help with some of the research, with some of the things we are doing, which could help with clearer policy. So we can bring also things that has to do with strong science. So strong science, which would include like infrastructure that has to do with the monitoring, reporting, and verification, which we know that is quite very important. So, and then logistic visibility and optimization, which is what we are working towards now to promote a lot. So now trying to look at the life cycle impact assessment, the impact of some of the logistics movement of the CDR projects that might probably be going on in Kenya. So, and as well as developmental benefits. So because we also believe that the benefit of the process has to be socially beneficial for the Kenyan people, as well as, environmentally beneficial, as even economically beneficial. So bringing the science into the space, bringing the logistical visibility, logistical optimization, as well as developmental benefits. And then we then will be able to see that so many buyers want to support in the long run, even in the short term and the long run. So if we are able to combine all these things with credible MRV, like I said, which is monitoring, reporting, and verification, if we are able to combine all these things that the KCC can bring with transparent project designs, that's some of the things we are already doing with even I think we have some project like biomass for construction that we are trying to implement, a lot of logistics things going on internally and even on ground currently that we are devising. So with this kind of transparent project design, we believe that in the short run or even in the medium term or long run, we believe that Kenya can become like a global destination for durable removal, carbon removal integrity. Because for us, we think, in the long run that Africa should not just simply be a supplier of low cost carbon credits. So it should be like we see an opportunity to build an approach that is firstly locally led, which, like I said, with so many institutions that are being involved in the local space, even externally. So if we are able to develop, human capacity and capabilities that is locally led, scientifically sound, as well as even economic transformative. So we think in the long run, we are able to see some of the effects of the work that Ines and the likes are doing on ground.
Yeah, great. I think that's super interesting to hear, because CDR suppliers will engage with the sector in a very different way from that, I think, and having actors such as KCC, a non-profit but tied to a global logistics firm, ultimately a lot of carbon removal, pretty much all of it is about moving something from somewhere to somewhere else. Like that is what we're going to have to do. So honing in on the LCA side, improving efficiencies there, improving accountability and tracking of all that, I think that's a really useful lens that KCC can take and bring to the sector. Ines, I'm going to come back to you for a bit of the supplier's perspective. And again, we're setting the scenes here about what's changed. I think Judy's mentioned some of the changing regulations and starting to bring things into that side. But from a more startup lens, how have you seen the views of investors developing over time? And what are some of the maybe the changing questions that you used to get 3 years ago to what you're getting now? And how would you gauge general investor attitudes into CDR, particularly in Kenya and Africa?
Yeah, super. So starting with the first wave of questions being, what is CDR? What is biochar? From a really early stage in which I guess most of us have gone through the journey of educating what is carbon removal, how is enhanced rock weathering different than biochar, why is biochar model A better than biochar model B. And to your point, Yemi, on low tech versus high tech, which is a question that happens a lot. And I actually love what you mentioned on being perceived as a high tech, regardless of the geography, which I think is extremely important, especially as we address climate justice and we bring engineering in the ground. And then later on was a bit more on the model. So I actually think a lot of investors were re-strategizing their climate thesis as they were talking to most of us, right? And probably the typical investment model would be Silicon Valley of 10x returns in 2 years, driven by hyper-growth soft tech companies, towards the Silicon Savannah of unsexy engineering deep tech, capex heavy machines that actually sequester CO2 through a lot of engineering, and which is absolutely what I believe that the planet needs to balance the carbon emissions. But then, yeah, this takes factories, this takes machines, and this takes a lot of human labor as well, right? So then the infrastructure ticket as a return is not a short-term cash return, but rather a longer return and more patient capital. So I think this was the last piece on the returns. I think later on the line, we're seeing a bit of risk perception on the revenue figures, because at the end of the day, with not really clear country policy, at least in the carbon removal space, up to recently that we are doing a lot of efforts, the revenue gets some sort of risk perception into it, and the quality of that as well. But thanks to Carbon Removal Kenya, which is an amazing association, thanks to CAMAC, and thanks to the government, especially to the Climate Envoy's office, there's a lot of effort and push on driving these favorable policies to carbon removal. And this then provides better confidence to the investors on technologies that are investment ready, that can deliver high quality credits today, that can get ICRA certified as we got earlier on this year. And then finally, that are grounded in community participation and strong scientific validation, which is a great validation of a lot of progress in maturity in the industry.
Yeah, great. I think it's very interesting to hear about the different types of investment capital as well. I think often people think investors, or it has to be VC, it has to be angel, it has to be this sort of, as you said, like super high growth, but potentially there's good fits for other forms of investor with more patient capital, more long-term views, and certainly more impact lenses that is going to be really, really useful for carbon removal projects, but is also going to generate great returns for those investors. I think this is a super interesting space to be getting into. And I think we've seen as well, more and more people want some of this in their portfolio. If they have some sort of impact lens in a fund, it feels like now is the time that they are saying, okay, well, we need some exposure towards carbon removal then. And how are we going to get it? And there's a lot of opportunities for that here. Judy, I'm going to come back to you. We're on to our last round of questions now. And then after we've spoke to everyone once more, I'd love to throw it out to the audience. There's still so many of you here. So if you have some questions, please fire them into the chat. I think there's a Q&A function there, and we'll get onto as many of those as we can. But Judy, looking forward now, what do you think are some of the key moves in your world that are going to unlock some of this, both on the nature-based side, including afforestation, but also on the CDR side? Is there anything in the pipeline that's coming up that you're excited about, or you want to make a real push for, or is there stuff that isn't in the pipeline that we need to get in there now?
Yeah, thank you. Before I answer your question, I want to maybe just emphasize that the NBS kind of things or side of things, this has taken almost a decade. There has been a lot of conversations on NBS and the afforestation kind of sector, even agroforestry. But on the CDRs, tech engineered kind of things, I think until recently, 2 or 3 years ago in Kenya, is when I would say this has started being a conversation. So I'd actually pat the team on the back and say, you've done a great job. Here you are. And if we are to look back 10 years from now, then we will have taken very great strides, given that there's already that conversation going. As I mentioned, the policymakers always depend on the science and depend on the experts in the field to include within the policy landscape. So I see a lot of hope, given that there is that conversation already going with the Carbon Removal Association, together with the Ministry of Environment and the Climate Change Directorate, with the DNA, with the Climate Envoy, with all the government entities required. There is maybe also need for increased engagements and conversations with the sector industry. As we see NDC reporting and national reports coming out, there'll be a lot of scrutiny on which sectors are approvals and corresponding adjustments being applied. So the question then would be, as the country is preparing for the next greenhouse gas inventory, how is the sector going to engage in that space so that as the policy conversation continues, then CDR and tech removal, for example, is included. In Article 6 or in Article 6, it's always said that if you can't count it, or you can't trace it, then you cannot authorize it. So how does the sector start engaging from the basics in terms of the greenhouse gas inventory, in terms of engaging with the sector, that, and how does the investments that the private sector is doing align with the sector targets set out within the NDC? That'll be for me the starting point. The second area is given that it's a sector that is evolving, maybe lobbying for inclusion of these types of technology within the bilateral agreements that are under negotiations. We applaud the Kenya government for the already finalized or discussed or signed bilateral agreements for Article 6, that is with Sweden and with Switzerland. We see conversations going on with Singapore, so inclusion of this type of technology in such bilateral agreements would be a great opportunity moving on in the future. The last is Kenya just submitted its a list of types of projects that can be considered as 6.4. I know it's not very explicit for tech engineered CDR. And for me, I would not be worried at this particular point, given that the case, for example, the dark attribution, there's still questions of where do you attribute that captured emissions from within the different IPCC sectors, so that by the time the government is including such technologies and innovations, maybe globally, as the technologies evolve, as the methodologies evolve, then it becomes clearer. So for me, my parting shot would be, let's keep engaging. Let's talk about it. Let's crack the brains on how best to capture it within the legislations, within the policy frameworks, and even within the investments language, so that then the high costs investments that Ines has mentioned here, how then can we bring those costs over time? It's only expensive now since it's just starting, but I'm sure as we progress, this will become easier. I am very optimistic that this is doable, and it's going to be a different story 5 years from now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Judy.
Okay.
Well, I put that question in there basically to get some free consulting for CRK. So thank you very much, because that was incredibly useful, and some really great ideas for carbon removal going forward. You mentioned 5 years from now, and that leads me straight into my question for BME. I mean, how do you, if everything goes well, we can get these frameworks moving and carbon removal starts building, what does success look like for KCC? What's the vision of the future for carbon removal there?
Very good question. Thank you. Like we know, most of these carbon removal pathways now, they are like relatively in their infancy stage. So we see that in the next 5 years, some of the things, or even in the medium term, some of the things that we hope to keep, pushing out and pushing forward will be like running several science-backed pilot projects across, pathways like enhanced weathering, biochar, biomass to carbon, with transparent MRV, so monitoring, reporting and verification. So talking about that, we need, because like I said, it's still in the infancy stage, so many questions attached to it, so many people still having a lot of maybe second guessing and the like. So we need like a very functional and functioning MRV system, and even life cycle infrastructure that would probably be supported by local institutions, like some of the things that UD just mentioned, so that the data and the verification capacity, they are kind of built inside or within the country, rather than being imported into the country. We also would like to see a kind of growing ecosystem, like already some of the things that are going on currently, to see it growing more, of Kenyan-led scientists, developers, businesses coming into the space, creating jobs, creating technical expertise. So the goal will be, for maybe a medium term, will be for credibility, for building capacity building, and even maybe proof of concept. And to now kind of take it maybe a little bit further, maybe a long-term agenda. A long-term agenda would probably be to see Kenya, for instance, as African center for kind of trusted carbon removal projects and strong MRV standards. So because we see that there is the capacity to do that. There is capacity. There is a lot of resources, like we already know, to be in that kind of space. So from there, exporting top quality, maybe carbon credits that are very valued for transparency and added benefits. So we would also use some of this carbon removal to support national goals then. So like better soils, better, less wastage, new industries growing up, stronger energy, stronger transport system. So those are the kind of things. So I'll just summarize to say, in the medium or very short term, we are looking at credible projects, but then on a more longer time horizon, we'll be trying to see that, okay, we need to see a kind of matured, self-reinforcing CDR economy that can create value for Kenya and Kenyans, and then set the benchmark for Africa and then, the world at large.
I think that's really well put, Obiemi. Yeah, I think you're so right. If we achieve that vision, for CDR, there's going to be so many great knock-on effects and impacts. You touched on soil health, but I think also meaningful jobs and employment and a lot of other socioeconomic benefits that are going to come just as a natural byproduct. So I'm with you on the vision. That's my vision too. And I think everyone in CIK shares that. Ines, I'll give you the last parting shot before we open it up to Q&A. There's lots of people on the call. Probably a lot of people will watch the recording. You're a supplier. Being a supplier means you just go from one challenge to the next, particularly if you're the CEO. So what is one thing that you're focused on, or one challenge you think there is for CDR in Kenya that maybe there's some external help with, or who could help you with that challenge? And let's throw it out there.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start first mentioning the potential that we got on the last survey of CDR in terms of where this could lead if putting the right resources, so the sector can attract 775 million in foreign investments over the next decades. That was, I think, 76,000 jobs, in which 76% were engineering jobs, which pretty much aligns with the president's mandates. And then if they happen to be either in haze rock weathering or biochar, there's a huge, massive impact in farmers' income and yields, right? So overall, I think this was like between 12 and 15 million tons of CO2 by 2030 cumulatively, meaning that Kenya really has the leading ingredients for engineered removals. Now, I do think the innovators are present, the government is present, the funding is present, the pilots are getting started. What I do think we all need is speed on this to happen a bit faster, and by speeds, I think it's funding. So the funding should come into more pilots, more competition to make each other better, more science to be back validated, more labs that are currently inexistent, and most of us are not only building a startup but building an industry when shipping things abroad to Europe or the US. The talent is here, the first stages are here, but with all of this potential, I think it's a matter of funding and getting things up and running a lot faster than climate. That is, at the end of the day, the ways that we are all chasing. And so that's my message. So investors out there, get your pockets empty right now, because it's a lot cheaper to invest right now, and we can some sort of like mitigate than to invest later on the line, which is going to be a lot more expensive for all of us to have to climate consequences with a lot of lives that would be affected. And this is unfortunately the disproportionately consequence of the global south, as it will, all of us are going to be affected, but this is affected sooner, and it's absolutely unfair. So funding is the summary.
Yeah, great. I think, it's not only cheaper now, but it's also more catalytic, as you said. Like the sooner we start on this curve, the quicker we're going to be able to get to the really high volume. So, like from both a returns perspective and also an impact perspective, it makes so much sense. So, again, founder asks for more money. The new headline tomorrow. It's breaking news. Okay, great. Thank you so much to all of my amazing panelists tonight. Ines, Obiemi, Judy, thank you. We've got a little bit of time for questions. I've opened the chat and there's a couple in there. So Anna, if there's somewhere else where there's some more, The first question I can answer, will we get a recording of this? Yes, it is being recorded, and I think a link will be sent out by Anna or the team. And then the second one, I think, is probably for you, Ines. With EU and US buyers increasing their focus on durable removal, how can Kenya position itself as a trusted supplier of high quality CDR to global markets? So we'll start with Ines, and then if either of you guys also want to add something, then you're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, first of all, we need to work with methodologies that make Europe and US comfortable, maybe in the beginning, as we are drafting ours. And so by that, it means that probably we all go with getting our projects validated by Isometric, by Carbon Standards International, by Pure Earth, and all of these institutions that already have a credible perception within the markets. And this is the approach we took, that I'm pretty sure most of us are taking, because at the end of the day, this is one of the risk perceptions on not making up any data. We need transparent MRP, and if that needs to be outsourced in the beginning, I think it's more than fine. It's about providing the proof. And then finally, in my humble opinion, we do not need to overpromise. So if we are here for the long term, which we all are, that means that we want to be really, really cautious about trying to deliver the tons in time at our very best, and then create this credibility. Because at the end of the day, we're selling a QR code, which is being bought by a company in San Francisco, which has absolutely no connection to our factory, right? And I do think it's part of the credibility and involving the buyer side in the challenges that are naturally happening, and being extremely transparent about everything, and trying our best, and then getting a repeat after we all grow.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. I think we've got time, probably two more questions. So I'll pose one to Opiemi, and then Judy, I'll come to you last, because I think there's one that fits in with you there. So first, Opiemi, Leela Kitu has asked, ocean-based CDR is emerging globally, but few African countries are exploring this area. I know KCC has looked at ocean alkalinity enhancement, for example. So where do you think ocean CDR fits into Kenya's current CDR strategy? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Opiemi.
Oh, okay. Sorry. For us with at KCC, we are really looking, to begin to, invest, or not necessarily invest, to support, pilot projects that has to do with ocean alkalinity enhancement. So, and then because now it's like the technology, like I said, is still very much in the infancy stage, and then we are gonna be looking at it from the side of, okay, maybe the technology invention is not the problem, but then the issue that we have to first of all deal with is the issue with scaling deployment, logistics optimization, life cycle data. So once all these things can come together, we can then say, okay, this is how we need to go forward in this region. But then for us now at KCC, where we are at currently, we haven't restricted ourselves to maybe a geographical location as regards to OAE projects. So we are still speaking with partners around the world, because we feel like there's still a lot of things that can be understood from the technology itself, because now it's like, based on some of the studies and research we have done internally, we see that there is still much to be done. Sometimes we get questions that says that, okay, so how do you confirm that you are really taking up a lot of carbon with maybe an amount of feedstock that you throw to the ocean. So some of these questions are still very much open-ended. But then once some of these questions are being answered by research, by solid research, because I was talking a lot about science over my course of discussion, once we are able to answer some of these questions, then we can begin to roll it out to where we have the opportunity, to where we see that, okay, maybe in this particular region, we see that considering the proximity to the ocean, we can do something here. So, but at this time that we are now, we are currently speaking with some, some pilot projects here and there, some scientists, some startups that are looking at OAE, but we have not kind of restricted ourselves to a kind of geographical space.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, there's definitely some people doing good work on this. One of them, organization that springs to mind, is Ocean Visions. I think they're a really amazing organization based in Mombasa and also working in Dar es Salaam. So that could be a good research point for you as well, Leila. Thank you very much for the question. Judy, we've had a few questions on a similar line regarding community. So Alice asked, how can CDR developers in Kenya ensure projects meaningfully benefit local communities? And I know this has also been a massive part of nature-based solutions and previous methods of removal. So there's a couple of other questions that kind of link into that same framework. Just to finish off the webinar, it would be great for you to just, I think, give some of your perspectives about what has happened before and how can CDR make sure that we learn from those and protect the communities that we're trying to work with.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you, participants, also for the great questions. On how can projects ensure that there is meaningful community benefits? And I think I would also combine this with a question from Daniel on how these technologies can prevent land-related that have been there. Kenya has taken time to actually develop also what I would call sector-specific laws. For the benefit of other participants, Kenya has 3 types of land tenure, and we have a community land. We see a lot of challenges on public land and also community land to be that. The carbon markets regulations have provided for meaningful consultations to be undertaken and requirements that as a second layer to undertaking environmental and social impact assessments, which all projects are required to have an ESIA license, which is the first level of engagement with the project with the NEMA, which is also the DNA. The second layer is on undertaking free, prior, informed consent. Note that there is increasing realization that FPIC is a process, but not just a one of exercise. So consultations need to be undertaken across board and to ensure that communities on lands where these investments are being undertaken have been consulted, are aware of the good and bad and ugly that these particular projects are supposed to cause. I would want to emphasize that these projects implemented in these spaces, it's not only carbon-related projects, it's all projects or those that are aiming to trade within the carbon market and those that does not need to trade on carbon markets, because they are also bound by sector legislations. For example, under the forestry sector, it requires that while the project is being implemented on a public land, it is good for the Community Forest Association, which is communities that are living within the boundary of 5 kilometers, be consulted and engaged so that they are aware of what is happening within their vicinity. The third layer that has been provided by the regulations is the requirement that county governments gives a nod or an approval or an endorsement of the ongoing projects. So with these three particular layers, I would call them 4 layers of protection, then communities are well safeguarded and they are well protected. So the question now lies with, while you're implementing this project, how conversant are communities with this particular project for them to have an equal and meaningful engagement with the project developers? It's an elephant in the room or an elephant question, and I want to say that this is not just a problem for Kenya, it's a problem across the communities. May not be conversant with the high-tech language that carbon methodologies often attribute. But it's the duty of all stakeholders benefiting or supporting, including the policymakers and the government, to support communities and stakeholders to understand the investments that are happening within their lands. There is also the question of how to prevent. I think that's I have captured. There was also the question of how do we, what are the other handles that are making it difficult for CDR besides funding. I mentioned earlier, there has been a lot of questions on methodologies, and that, as Ines has mentioned, and you've seen steps and even ICOA, for example, of the methodologies under gold standard and also under VCS. So the question or the big handle still stands: which sector is this investment going to be attributed to? The solution there is continuous engagement. Countries are required to continuously update their greenhouse gases inventories, continuously update their eligible kind of projects that can they are willing to authorize for corresponding adjustments and not. And within that space of policy engagement, there is room to have steps going on or meaningful progression of CDR becoming one of those technologies to look out for in the country and in the continent. There's a question by Daniel.
We might have to cut it there, Judy, I think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Unless, I mean, there's so much still to unpack here. I think there was a question directly in there for Ines from Daniel. So maybe Ines, you can follow up with some of his details afterwards as well. But because we're now at the end of the meeting, I think we'll have to bring it to a close. I just want to say thank you so much to my amazing panelists. I told you they were experts at the start, and they've proven themselves very, very worthy. So thank you, Judy. Thank you, Opiemi. Thank you, Ines. And finally, thank you to everybody who joined. Hopefully some useful information there and some stimulating thoughts. If you want to get more involved in carbon removal in Kenya, then Carbon Removal Kenya is a great place to do that. And we'd be grateful to hear from anybody. So thanks a lot. And yeah, look forward to engaging with you all in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you to Sam for great facilitation.